Great. So welcome back to our Web Fund class. Let's take a look at where we're at, y'all. First of all, thank you to John and Josh for letting me hijack this session. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I do love CSS. I love front end. I love making things look pretty. And that's what we're going to do today. So here we are in our 10th day of our Web Fundamentals stack. And we're taking a look at Bootstrap today. We're in our advanced topics. So yesterday we learned about APIs. Yesterday we learned about the terminal. Oops. And we learned about Git.
Welcome back.
And we learned about Git. Today we're going to learn about Bootstrap, and then we're going to learn a little bit about media queries. Isn't that correct, Josh?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Sweet. So this is the nitty-gritty, y'all. Let's take a look at the platform for this section here. So I'm in the JS portion, and then underneath there, you'll see the advanced topics. And in that module, you'll see the Bootstrap section right down here. And that's where I'm at. So in here, we're going to talk about Bootstrap, getting familiar with Bootstrap, what it is. There's a couple of great videos here using Bootstrap for layouts. So do take the time to get familiar with this section here. And I'm going to do kind of a deeper dive on not only Bootstrap, but kind of frameworks in general. Okay. So I want to take about 20 minutes just to talk about frameworks in general. And then I want to take about 30 minutes to demo recreating your infamous profile page in Bootstrap. And then I got like a 10-minute leeway for questions. And, you know, maybe if one of the other two sections goes a little bit over, then we have that kind of a leeway. So it is 10:12 right now. At 10:32, I want to be done talking about frameworks in general. So let's start talking about that. Over here, I've got a completely unstyled HTML page. And you're used to seeing stuff like this. Just when you start making an HTML page, that's what we see, right? The browser default styles, which is, as you can see, extremely ugly, right? And when we're going through a boot camp, all these projects and all these assignments come at us fast and furious. And if you're like me and you hate having your projects look like this with the default browser styles, then what you might want to do is get a CSS framework incorporated into each of your projects. Because if you do, then you can get your projects looking really nice and really spiffy, or at least halfway decent, with very little setup and very little effort. And that's what CSS frameworks are for quickly prototyping a project, or to provide yourself with a great start for a project, or as we'll see with the more comprehensive libraries / frameworks, something very close to a finished product, okay? So first of all, we just need to define what a CSS library / framework is. What it is basically somebody else's style sheet. So all throughout the Web Fundamentals stack so far, we've been creating our own style sheets where we've created each style definition, each rule by hand, manually, every single one. And we've linked to that file from our HTML document, right? With that link tag in our head. Well, we're going to do the same thing generally with CSS libraries / frameworks. But instead of linking to our own style sheet, we're going to link to somebody else's. And in most cases, this is not just somebody singular. This is a team of CSS experts that have created classes for us to use, so we don't have to create them ourselves. And that's generally what a library or framework is no matter if it's CSS or some other language, library, or framework. Okay? So when we're talking about CSS library / framework specifically, there are three major groups. One, there are the classless or minimalist libraries or frameworks. So with these frameworks, they're going to be very low learning curve, and they're going to be a very light file size. Okay, so right here we've got that spelled out for you. And then I've got a few examples of these classless minimalist frameworks. So I want to take you through what installing one of these looks like. And I like all of these, which is why I included all of these. But let's just choose the first one, okay? So let's choose Sakura. Now open that up into a new tab here. And we could just drop in a, here's the installation. We have a manual installation. We have a, we can download the CSS and include it in a file in our project, or we can use what is called a CDN link. Who knows what a CDN link is? Anyone?
Isn't it something like a content distribution network, I think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's content delivery network.
Or okay.
Yeah, and what that is it's a global network of servers that all carry the same file. So if you request a file from a CDN, it's going to use the server whose location is closest to you geographically, which is awesome, right?
An example of that's like Cloudflare, right? That's one of the services they provide.
Exactly. So there's a bunch of these services that allow you to serve from a CDN. For example, like Vercel or Netlify, but that's out of the scope of this lecture. So let's choose this CDN version here. And as you can see, it's just a link tag that defines a style sheet. But instead of the file location being a file on your machine, it is a file on the internet. As we can see, it begins with HTTP, okay? So let's copy this. And let's go to our HTML here. And this is the bare HTML for the page that you see here. And let's just pop it in, okay? So in the head of my document, I'll paste that in. We'll save it and take a look. And there you go. I don't have any classes in here. This is what we're calling a classless CSS library / framework. So if you don't want to do any styling at all by hand, then use one of these solutions. Okay, a classless or minimalist solution. Now everything is just kind of works and kind of looks nice, right? Which is pretty cool. Any questions so far? Great. So some of these are going to require a little bit more setup than the others, but across the board, it's a very easy setup, similar to just grabbing the CDN link and popping it in the head. I do like Pico CSS as well, so let me show you that before moving on to the next group of frameworks. So let me click Pico CSS. We'll open that up into a new window, and we could click the Get Started here perhaps, and we could download Pico and link it in the head of our website, or we can install from a CDN as well. Since we saw what a CDN installation looks like already with Sakura, let's choose the install manually option for Pico. See what that's like. So let's just click this download Pico link right here. And we got a zip file that gets downloaded. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Okay, and we got a few different files here. So usually in these cases, you're going to want to link to a file in the CSS folder, if there is one. And you'll probably want either pico.css or pico.min.css. What do you guys think is the difference between these two files? Anyone?
Is min just like less than standard?
It's just minified. Totally. So it's not less than standard. It includes everything, but there's no formatting. So if I open up pico.css in my VS Code, then we see we've got line breaks, right? And we've got formatting, CSS formatting. But if I open up pico.min.css in my VS Code, it's all one line. Okay. And we can write our CSS like that. It's just completely unreadable, right? So min, just getting rid of those line breaks, lightens up the CSS file weight by quite a bit. So let's grab this whole folder. I'm going to drop it in my project folder right here. Let's get rid of our soccer link. And let's make a new link. Okay, it's going to be a CSS link. And I'll get rid of the pre-populated href value. Then I'm going to start with a // which is just the easiest way to avoid typos. Okay, we're going to say start in this current directory with a dot and the slash. Now I could just simply choose the file I want to link. So I want to go into the Pico folder. And I want to go into the CSS folder. And I want the Pico CSS or the Pico min.css. I'll choose the min. Okay, we'll save that and take a look at our page now. And we're over here. So here's Pico. So right off the bat, you can see that everything is on the edge of the page, right? We don't like butting up against the edge of the page. So let's do this. Let's put everything in the body of our HTML inside of a container. So I'm just going to collapse all of these sections here and then select everything in the body, and we'll wrap that in a container. A div with the class of container. Okay, and that's what we see here. A div with the class of container has been is now wrapping everything in the content of our body. And now we see it's a little bit better. Okay. Now, why is it dark mode? It's because Pico respects the user preference. So if your system preference is for dark mode, then Pico is set up to look for that. And if they see dark as your preference, then they'll switch your mode to dark. Okay. So this is what Pico CSS looks like. I can see some questions here. So wouldn't you always want to include the CSS file in your folder if you reference the CDN? Couldn't there be issues with the CDN going down or changing the URL path for the CSS file? Depends, right? So if you just kind of want to get something really quickly going, then CDN is fine unless you don't have internet, right? CDN, if there's really no such thing as the server going down, because we know that a CDN is a network of servers. So it's not possible, okay? But if I chose the CDN version, then I wouldn't get auto completion on my classes. For instance, I can put a class attribute here on this section. Then if I wanted to see the classes available to me, I can do a control space and see all the classes that are available to me, which would not be possible See, here are all the classes available to me in Pico. This would not be possible if I did only the CDN instead of a downloaded file, because then it can't index the classes in that file. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Cool. So that's classless, or, oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to get rid of that section. I just want to get rid of that class. So that's classless or minimalist frameworks. Now I want to talk to you guys about the atomic frameworks, also known as utility-first frameworks. And with these frameworks, the learning curve is relatively high, and the file size is still light, but only if you configure it with what's known as post-CSS, purge CSS, which if you install Tailwind, which is the most popular utility-first framework, if you install it using the recommended installation process, then you get post-CSS, purge CSS out of the box, okay? And I'll show you kind of what that looks like, but it is out of the scope of this lecture. But I just want to kind of show you what Tailwind looks like and what the differences are, okay? So over here, I've got a picture of what a button might look like, styled with Tailwind. So as you can see with the button in a classless or minimalist framework, we don't have any classes at all. But with a utility-first or atomic framework, we have a heck of a lot of classes. And as you could probably tell by just the names of these classes alone, they do one thing. Each class does one thing, has one job. So you're going to stack these classes on top of each other to get the desired effect. So this has a background of blue at 500. Tailwind goes from 50 to 950, 50 being the lightest, 950 being the darkest, with every color shade that they have. And we could define classes for only when we hover on the element. That's what we see here. Here's the color of the text. Here's the weight of the font. And this is padding on the y-axis, so top and bottom, of 2. And that's 0.5 rem. I just know that from knowing Tailwind. And then px4, that's padding on the x-axis of 1 rem. And then we round the corners. And that's what a button might look like in Tailwind. And I've set up a tiny little Tailwind project here for you guys to see what one might look like. So here's a tiny Tailwind project. I just have a nav bar at the top, and then I have a gradient, some gradient text here in the body, and a button. And I want to show you the code for that, okay? For something like Tailwind, you're going to need a project set up. And that's what I've got here in this Tailwind folder that I will be pushing to GitHub for you guys so you can take a look at it. But in this Tailwind folder, I've got a lot more files than you're used to. And the explanation of it is beyond the scope of this lecture. But I am starting with styles.postcss, which imports all of the Tailwind classes. I am watching all of my files for changes, okay? In this terminal, it's exactly what I'm doing. I'm watching for changes, okay? And if I change my file, then my CSS gets compiled or built using post-CSS, purge CSS, and gets output into this dist, styles.css. And this is the output of all of the imported styles from Tailwind. And it's configured or tailored to only the classes that I have used in my HTML. Meaning that Tailwind looks, or more, to be more specific, post-CSS, looks at my index.html, scans it for Tailwind class names, and purges all of the CSS that I do not use from the output. So in this styles.css in the dist, only the classes that I use are in this file. Okay. And we could take a look at the file weight here. If I reveal this in Finder, it's only 14K, which is very, very light. Okay. So this is kind of a typical Tailwind project here, where, as we can see, we've got a lot of class names, which is kind of the other end of the spectrum from a classless or a minimalist CSS library or framework. Any questions on atomic or utility first libraries? Okay. Tailwind, I'll tell you right now, has a great site for their documentation. Getting set up is very simple. So follow those rules if you want to get started with Tailwind, because it is the most popular utility first framework in front-end development. Okay. Now, for our final CSS framework group, we've got classless minimalist, we've got utility first, atomic, and now we want to talk about these comprehensive or general purpose frameworks, which is where Bootstrap falls in. So the learning curve for these, low to mid, I would say. The file size, mid to heavy. But it can be light if you configure it with post CSS, purge CSS, right? So you can configure it to look at all the class names that you're using and then purge all the CSS that you're not using, the same way that we did for Tailwind, okay? A couple of different examples here. Bootstrap, Bulma is a very popular one, and Foundation is popular as well. But today we're going to talk about Bootstrap. So I'm going to click on Bootstrap here, and we're going to put Bootstrap on this page. Okay. Here we go to the getbootstrap.com page, and we could npm install this, which again is kind of out of the scope of this lecture, or we can download it, or we can use the CDN. For the sake of brevity, I will just copy the CDN link, and I'll go to our project, close this up, and get rid of the Pico and paste in the Bootstrap. Okay, so here's the Bootstrap CDN. We'll go check out our site now, and here's our site with just no Bootstrap classes at all except for the container. Okay, so as we can see, it's kind of like a classless minimalist framework, in that we didn't have to put any other classes in here, and it looks nice already. But it also comes with its own classes, as well as atomic classes. So it kind of marries the two of these other groups together in one. Okay. So really quick, I want to show you a little bit, because we're already over our 20 minutes for this first section. But I want to show you a little bit of getting this to kind of look nice, especially with forms, which is what you're going to be creating a lot of in this bootcamp, and tables, which again is what you're going to be creating a lot of in this bootcamp. So let me start there, okay? So in our HTML, I'm going to go all the way down to our form. And right here, I'm going to put some Bootstrap classes on here, okay? So on all these divs, I'm going to put a class that gets us a little bit of space underneath each div. by giving it a class of MB-3. What do you guys think that stands for?
Margin bottom three.
Margin bot.
Exactly correct. And if we go to take a look, now we've got a little bit of margin underneath each one of these inputs. Now I'm going to put the Bootstrap classes on the labels and the inputs. Okay, so let's go to each one of these labels. And we'll make a class here of, what is it? Label dot, I think it's form label. Yeah, form label, as we see now with the boot. Oh, look, we use the CDN link, but we're still getting auto completion, which is nice. So sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. So form label on all of my labels, and then on my inputs, I want a class of form dash control. And now here is my form with these Bootstrap form controls. Okay, and this should probably be password. I don't know why I didn't change that yet, but let's change that. And I think I had another one. So here's username, and then this should be email. Let's change this to email. Okay, so username, password, email. And it looks very nice, right? We can constrain the size of this form. If we wanted to, we could put this users table here on the right side of this form by using the built-in grid system of Bootstrap. And I do want to show you that real quick, okay? So we've got this section here, which contains my form. We've got this section here, which contains my table. So what I need to do is to get these two sections side by side, okay? And I'm going to use Bootstrap's grid system to do that. So I'm going to select the entirety of these two sections. And I'm going to open my Emmet wrap with abbreviation, activate that command, and put in a div with the class of row. And that is like Bootstrap's version of a flex container. Now, by default, every direct child of this row will be side by side if we make them into columns, okay? So let's put a column class on these two children of the row, okay? So on this section here and this section here, I'll put a class of COL. So now I have designated these two children of the row to be columns. And now, as we can see, they're side by side. Okay. We can make them look even nicer than this by putting them in cards. So let's put a card around our form here by wrapping that in a div with the class of card, and our form in a div with the class of card body. So card basically gives us the border, card body basically gives us our padding, okay? And we want to make this H2 now into a header. So we'll give the H2 a class of card dash header. So here's our new form with a card and a card header and our nice inputs in here. And finally, let's fix this button. So we traditionally like to have our buttons to the right. So on the containing div of the button, what I can do is put a class of text end on it so that any inline elements within the div go to the end of the container. Okay, so now we see the register button is over there. And then to make this into a Bootstrap button, all we need to do is put the class of BTN on it and then give it a color which in Bootstrap can be primary, secondary, warning, error, success, danger, stuff like that. Primary, as you can see, gives us a blue color. Okay. So pretty easy to get something looking very close to finished in Bootstrap. Any questions on the form or the card classes so far? Can I give the table column more space? I haven't gotten to the table yet. Let's take a look at tables. Okay. So here's our table. All that's needed to turn this into a Bootstrap table is to give your table a class of table. Okay. So I'll do that. Take a look. And now we've got some lines here. Okay. I can't really give it more space, but I can give the entire column more size. So let's do that. So with this column, I want it to take up more than half, right? And I didn't designate any column widths on either this column or this column, but I can. I can give it a width here by saying, say, for example, call 8. Now, every row in Bootstrap consists of 12 available columns. And each column can take up any number of those 12 columns. So in this scenario, what I've done is I've said this section should take up 8 of the 12 columns, and the other columns should be auto-calculated. Okay, so let's take a look here. And now we see we've got a little bit more space for our table, because I've said this should take up 8 no matter what, and then go ahead and auto-calculate this column. Let me show you a couple more things with the table before we move on. So with this table here, what I would like to do is I'd like to give it some stripes. So we could do table striped, right? So every alternate row is a little bit different color. And we can also give it some hover functionality by saying table hover. So that now we get a little bit of user feedback, which is nice. Okay. Cool. And that is your overview of Bootstrap. I'm going to get a little bit more deep divey into Bootstrap by now recreating the profile page in complete Bootstrap. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go to Bootstrap / profile page. Okay, so here I am on profile page. I don't have anything there, right? I've already got the project set up. Let's close these other ones so we're not confused. And here's my index.html for the profile page. As you can see, the body is empty, so we can start fresh. I've already got my images downloaded, those avatar images, and I've already got our wireframe. Okay, so this is the wireframe that I'm going to be following. And here's our HTML. And let's go ahead and get started on this by linking to Bootstrap, of course. So let's go back here. Let's grab that CDN. And let's paste that in. Okay. Now in here, I want a nav bar. So typically what you're going to do when you're learning Bootstrap, and also, you know, if you're, to my level, I still look things up at Bootstrap, right? And they just came out with this new version 5.3. So typically what you're going to want to do when you're learning Bootstrap is you're going to go to the documentation. And this is great because Bootstrap has fantastic documentation, and you get practice reading documentation, which is a absolutely vital skill for any developer. Okay. So here, what I want to do is I want to create a nav bar. So I'm going to either search for nav bar, or I could just scroll down into the components where they show the nav bar, okay? And typically what they'll do is they'll give you a high-level overview of how it works and what's necessary. And then they'll give you kind of the kitchen sink version of a Bootstrap nav bar. And then they're going to break it down piece by piece, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to use the one that looks the most like what we want, which would probably be something like this. With we need the button on the right, right? So kind of a combination of this one and the other one. But let's go with this one first, okay? So all I'm going to do is copy this to my clipboard. I'm going to copy that and then change what I need to change. Okay, pop that right in here, save it, and take a look. And there's my nav bar. Okay. In the profile page, it is dark, so let's make it dark. So right here, what I want is BG body tertiary, and the body, we're in light mode right now, but if we want it to be dark mode, well, what should we do? Let's just give it a BG, instead of BG body tertiary, let's give it BG dark. Let's see what that looks like. Now we got a dark nav bar. And let's make sure that we can see the text by saying text light. And that did not work. Text. They still use text light. You know what? Let's see what we can do here. So let's go back to BG body tertiary, because this is a new version. They just came out with the version 5.3. So let me see if this works. So let's do data-bs-theme. Let's change this to dark. Okay, so now I can see it. So what's great in Bootstrap version 5 is that we have dark mode out of the box, and we didn't have that for the 4 versions before it. Let's keep it in dark mode. Yeah, let's keep it in dark mode. I need this stuff off the edge though. So let's do that by changing it from container fluid to just container. We get that stuff off the edge. And we don't need a disabled, so let's get rid of that. But now we want this to be home. We want this to be my profile. And we want this to be like find connections, right? Yeah, find connections. And this is not our ARIA current and our active. So let's change our my profile to active, because we do see that it's a little bit bolder and lighter. So we'll put the active class on this one, and then make sure that we are accessible by putting our ARIA current attribute on this one instead. And there we go. All right, so there we go. We have our nav bar. And let's change, obviously, the text of nav bar to read profile. And there we go. We have our profile. Okay. All right. Let's get that button over here. So let's find out where our nav bar ends, right here in our collapser, right here. So we'll do a button.btn.btn-primary, and we'll say sign out and see where that goes. And there we go. So we've got our button right there. Now let's get started with our columns. So underneath my nav, now I want to have a row. Okay, so I'll do a section with the class of row with section.row. And then I want a main and an aside. So we'll do a main, and as you can see, right? So if we were to break this section up into 12 columns, I would say this is 8 and this is 4, because this looks like it's twice the width of the aside, right? So let's do that. We'll do main dot call dash 8, which creates a main with 8 columns. Then after that, we'll do an aside with a dot call dash 4. So remember, 12 available, okay? And inside main, we'll put a card. So card, inside here, we'll need a body. So card dash body. And, oh, our header, we forgot. Let's put our header. So dot card dash header. And we want a background of primary. And we want to give it more height than the rest of them. So let's give it a padding of the largest size, which is 5. Okay, let's see what that looks like so far. There it is, our big old card. Let's put that stuff in a container, right? So this whole section now should be in a container. There we go. We need some room below the nav. So let's put an MB-3 on the nav. Cool, looking better. Inside of our header, let's get an image in there. So in here, we want an image, and then we're going to put our Jane in here, and we'll give it an alt of Jane Doe. And there's Jane. We want to give it some roundness, right? So rounded, I think it's circle. Yeah, rounded circle. There's our rounded circle. And then for widths, we're going to have to create our own style for that. So in addition to Bootstrap, we can also, of course, have our own style sheet. So I'll make a new style.css, and I'll link to it. And this is important after the Bootstrap link, so that any of my styles can override any clashing styles in Bootstrap, if that were to be the case. But they don't have any classes called avatar, so I'll make a class called avatar, whose width is, let's say, 75 pixels to start out. Oh, and actually put that avatar class on the image right here. Avatar. And there's our avatar here. Let's give it a class of absolute. So we'll do position absolute. And now we've got it where we want it. But it actually looks kind of small. So let's make it twice that size. There we go. I'm happy with that. 150. So cards by default are position relative, which is why we see this absolutely positioned element is still confined to that card. It's just all of this stuff is behind the scenes. That's why I didn't manually have to put a class of relative on the card in order to confine this image to it. Because as we know, in order to make something absolutely positioned, we should probably relatively position its parent. Well, Bootstrap does that by default. Okay, cool. So inside of our card body, let's do our Jane Doe here, right? So let's make it an H1. It says Jane Doe. There it is. It's behind. So let's move it so that it's down. So we want some padding on the top of this. Oh, they have more. Oh, look at that. Oh, cool. Let's see what these are. Let's try 3rem. Well, that didn't work. Padding top 12. Let's try margin top on the H1. Class MT. This is all new stuff. Never tried this stuff before. I don't know why it's not working. What about the ones that I do know work? MT. Oh, well, I don't know why the other ones don't work. Why are they giving it to me? Oh, Maybe my Tailwind classes are getting mixed up into these for some reason. I don't know. It's food for thought. So we actually need more margin than that. Maybe we just make this this avatar a little bit smaller. Oh, that's too small. Let's go with 125. Let's go with 120. 110. There we go. Cool. So there's Jane Doe. I like to have shadows on these cards. So let's put a shadow on here. So it kind of looks like it's popping off the back a little bit. And then we want there to be underneath this H1, we want the map marker, right? So yeah, the map marker, then Seattle. So let's do that with Bootstrap icons. So I'm going to go back to the Bootstrap section here. And I want to go to the icons now. And I want to install these icons. So let's click install. And we've got a CDN link for that too. So let me grab that CDN link. And I'll go to our index.html. And we'll pop that in here as well. So now we have access to all of the Bootstrap icons. And I want to look for map. So here's our map marker. It's Geo-Alt-Fill. I'll click on that. And I'll grab the HTML that renders this icon. And again, this only works if you link to the CDN style sheet for the icons. So underneath that H1, let's put in an H3 with that icon in there. Because these icons, their sizes are governed by the font size, which is why I'm putting it in an H3, which is kind of non-intuitive, but that's why I'm doing it. So here's our little map marker here now. If I don't like the size, I can change it to H4, and there's that. I think I like H4. Afterwards, let's put in Seattle. And there's our Seattle. Awesome. Underneath that, I'm going to want a couple of paragraphs. So what is this supposed to say? Developer, engineer, problem solver. So let's do developer, engineer, problem solver. And there we go. Let's put another one underneath it. That says master of shadows and the internet. And there's that. Let's put a class of card. I think card text on these is what we want. That doesn't look what I wanted it to look like. Let's only have margin bottom on this one though. So let's take the margin bottom off of these with MB0. And let's just take the class off of this one because it already had a margin. Yeah, I want these to be closer together, but that's too close. So let's do a 1 in there instead. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. Now underneath that, I want our gear icon. So let's grab the gear icon from Bootstrap. And for that, I'm just going to search for gear and grab this icon here. Copy the icon font tag, pop that in. But it should be in a link, right? So let's put it in an A tag that goes to nowhere. And afterwards, we'll say edit profile. Go back to our page, and there's our link. I actually don't want there to be an underline on the space. So let's close the A here, and we'll open up a new one here. That also goes to nowhere. And there we go. So here's our profile card. Awesome. Underneath that, I want our education card. So let's go underneath this card, right? Which would probably, so let's let's think ahead. and we'll put some margin bottom on this card. Okay, let's collapse that so it's not distracting us. And then underneath here, I want another card with another shadow and some more margin bottom. In here, I do want a header that says education, right? Education. So let's do an H3. Let's see what that looks like. That's now our card header, whose background is dark. And we want a, what else do we want here? Card header, background dark. I think that's it. And we'll put education in there. There that is, great. Underneath the card header, still inside the card, we want a card body. Okay. In our card body, what do we want? We want Coding Dojo Full Stack Bootcamp. So we'll put that in an H4. Coding Dojo Full Stack Bootcamp. There we go. We want some more stuff in there. December 2019, March 2020. And that looks muted. So let's go muted on that with a P dot text muted. That doesn't look like it exists anymore, but let's give it a whirl. December 2019, March 2020. And it is a little bit muted. At least it kind of looks that way. Cool. What's next? Triple black belt. So underneath there, we'll do triple black belt in Python, MERN, and C#. Cool. There's our education card. We can even put a background of light perhaps on these, so maybe we can stand out a little bit more. Oh, look at this. This is some different stuff. Unless my Tailwind classes are getting, yeah. I don't know. Let's see. So BG light. So we want this rounded bottom, or actually overflow hidden, probably. Let's see this. Because we're not seeing our rounded on the bottom. So let's put that actually on the card instead. Yeah, now we're getting our rounded. And let's do text dark on this card as well. So on this card body, we'll do text dark. There we go. So if you wanted a light look to your cards, you can do something like that. Let's move forward here now. So in my aside, I want some more cards. So let's put a card in here with another shadow, with another margin bottom. And in here, I'll have an H, what did I use for the headers? H3s with a class of card header. And what else did I put on those card headers? BG dark. Well, it's dark anyway. So, well, let's see what happens if I keep it off. Card header, and this one says connection requests, right? Connection requests. See what that looks like. There we go, connection requests. Let's make this a little bit smaller. Let's go for H4 instead. Yeah, connection requests right there. And we'll have a body underneath the header. So dot card dash body. And in here, we're going to need some rows, right? We can also have, and let me show you what kind of granular control that we have in here, like our MB3 utility classes here. We have other utility classes, like the .flex class. Turns that into a flex, or I'm sorry, deflex. Turns that into a flex container. And everything inside of it, we want justify between. So this is like justify content space between. And we also want align items Oh, align center. Okay, I'm gonna have to look that up. Let's take a look at our documentation and we'll search for flex. So here's our flex. So what I want to do here is align everything to the center, and it's align item center. So I don't know why they didn't give me that. Okay, align items center. So I think this is justified content. I think what I'm getting here is like the tailwind. I'm getting my tailwind autocomplete for some reason. Okay. Now that I've got that, let's go inside this div. And in this div, I want a couple of columns. So let's make those 2 columns first. That's call times 2, gives me 2 columns. In my first column, what do I want? I want a couple of avatars. So let's do 2 images, right? So IMG will go times 2. Let's also give these a class of avatar small, which I didn't create yet, but I will need, right? So avatar small. There's 2 images here. Oh, no, 1 image. I'm sorry, what did I put 2? Only 1 image. All right, and we want to go into our images folder and we want our fill, right? Fill might be first, or Todd. Say fill. And then this is going to be rounded circle. Right, and then let's make this avatar SM class. So dot avatar dash SM. Let's say its width is, let's say 50 pixels. There we go, cool. And let's do, after that, we need its name, right? So still inside the first column. We're going to put, what do we want in here? A P tag? Yeah, let's do a P tag here. Fill S. Fill S. We got to get them side by side, though. What is this? Is it fill? Oh, it's fill K. Todd E is first. Oops. So let's see. We got to get them side by side. So this column now has to be deflex. And let's give this a justify content space between. Justify content between and an align items center. And let's put some gap in there too. Oops. Okay, we got that. Let's put the other column in there before we start freaking out about the space. Let's see if just putting some content in here alleviates that, which means I need a couple more icons. And over here, we can go back to icons and search for circle check. Here's check circle fill. Let's grab that. And which one comes first, actually? The check. Cool. So put that in here. And we'll try the to grab an X. So circle X. That's here too. Let's grab it. Put that right afterwards. And let's take a look. Right here, let's make them bigger, of course. So let's put them both into an H3, or you know what, let's do this. Let's put a text class on the parent. So we'll do an FS-3 for font size 3. So that's bigger. Okay, so they're here. We wanted them to be space between, right? Deflex, oh, these are calls? Why did I make these calls? We don't want that. There we go. Cool. So we need item, align item center on this is not working. Why isn't that working? It's kind of working. Oh, it's because this is a paragraph. So let's take off the margin bottom. There we go. Now it's lined up. Let's put maybe a little bit more space in here. Let's go to gap 3. There's our gap 3. Awesome. So there's fill S, and it's actually fill K, as we saw. But I do believe it's Todd E. Fill K, Todd E. So now we have one of these looking good. So let's just grab this whole row, and we'll copy it. Then in here, we want Todd. There's Todd. Todd. And then it should say Todd E. So we'll have Todd E. There we go. We need a space on the bottom of these rows. So where does that row start? Right here, right? MB-3, space between the rows. Awesome. We just have one more card now, right? So let's collapse this card. And you know what? Let's just copy this card. So we'll copy that, paste it underneath. And what we don't need are these circles here. So let's get rid of one of these rows. This is a row right here. Get rid of everything underneath it. So actually, let's collapse that so we know where it ends. There is it. Let's make sure I zap the right code. Cool. So now we only have one row. And from that row, I don't want the icons. So we got rid of those. Awesome. Now we just need Adrian in here. So we'll do Adrian D. Change this to Adrian. There's Adrian. Who's next? Anne, Elaine, and Ari. So let's grab this whole row. Oops. This row right here. 1, 2, 3. So we'll go to our first row right here, and we'll change this to Anne. And it'll say Anne. Change the alt. Our next one is Ari. Is that correct? Oh, Elaine. Elaine. It'll say Elaine. I don't know what Elaine's last initial, T. And let's do our last one here, which should be Ari. And our Ari's last initial is Y. Okay, there we go. And finally, we want to put those notifications, and I like to use badges for those things. So let's put a badge notification on here. And for that, I'm going to need to look it up. So we'll look up badges. So here's our badges. And what I want is like these pill badges, right? So that it looks like kind of like this. So let's grab this span right here. So I want to make sure that the header is relative and the span inside of it is all of this other stuff. So let's go to our header for our connection requests. So here's our connection request. We're inside of our header, which is an H4. You know what? Let's turn that into a div. And we'll do font size 4 because I got to put some other stuff in here. So not only will it take that, or maybe the solution is to just keep it that way and make this the H4. Let's do that. That's a little cleaner, I think. And then we'll paste in that span. Let's see what it looks like. There we go. Connection requests. And this is actually your connections. Okay, but where are we going to put the card header? New, oh, visually hidden. Oh, I see. Okay, so let's put, what is it, 500 plus? There we go. We have our 500 plus there. I don't like the border at all. Let's get rid of that border. There we go. And then we want the same thing in our other header here. So let's turn this again into a div. Turn this into the H4. And let's post one of these spans in there as well. So where did we grab that span? Here we go. Grab that span. And we'll pop that in here. And this is actually, what is this? 2. So put a 2 in there. And there we go. So there's our profile card, our profile page, all done in Bootstrap. Did we keep up with those questions in the chat? Yes, Braxton.
Hey, how would you add the numbers in the left or the right side columns? The total number of connection requests and your connections.
I chose to do those in those.
Oh, okay, I got you. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Hey, Narciso, I have a question.
Yeah.
First of all, congratulations. You recreated profile page without touching any CSS other than that specific one thing that we had to customize, which is pretty amazing. My question is, now that we're adding all these classes, it feels to me that our HTML gets cluttered with a lot of classes. What's your opinion on that?
Well, it's a lot better than Tailwind, right? But my opinion is this. At a glance, if you know Bootstrap, you know exactly what this does. Okay? Whereas, if you had some abstracted class name, you would have to then go to the CSS to find out what it does. Okay? So, it's a matter of preference. The Tailwind group would say it's a feature, not a bug. Right? To at a glance, look at your HTML and your HTML only to see exactly how that element is styled. But your mileage may vary. Yes, Anthony.
Is it possible to get that under connection requests? Can we get that too to be a perfect circle?
Let's see. So if I want it to be a perfect circle, it has to start as a perfect square, right? So let's try this. Let's do width. This is Tailwind. It's still giving me Tailwind stuff. Let's do we have aspect ratio? Let's see if we have aspect ratio. Oh, here, aspect ratio. So we have aspect ratio. We could do ratio dash 1x1. When we need ratio as well. So let's see if we just that gives us our ratio of 1:1. Oh, and we probably need to give it a size of some sort, right? So let's say that we have, let's call this notification. And then our notification can be with, I don't know, 30. Nope, it's not working. I'm sure there's a way. So right now we've got it so that it's a perfect circle, but it's obviously huge, right? We would have to do a little bit of a deep dive into that, but I'm sure there's a way to do it. I just don't know it off the top of my head. Anyone else? Okay. Cool. I do want to leave you with one final thing here. I want to show you a very cool site. And it's called Bootswatch. So a lot of the times the knock on Bootstrap is that it looks really bootstrappy. And it's a valid claim. And if you're concerned about that and you don't have the time to manually overwrite and configure and customize Bootstrap yourself, you can use one of these pre-made customizations. And what these are like, they're like skins for Bootstrap. Okay, which is pretty cool. And they're tuned for the latest version, 5.3. So let's try one of these out. And I do have a favorite one, and it's Superhero. So let's download this. Okay, we download a bootstrap.min.css file, which you can see here. So we're going to go into our downloads, and let's show that in our Finder so that we can then drag it over into our profile page. And this is a customized Bootstrap file. So instead of the CDN now, what I want is to link to that specific file. And now I don't have a site that looks really samey. Where am I going here? Spaces. That looks really samey. Now my profile page has a completely different look, just from linking to that different Bootstrap skin file. Okay, which is pretty dope. Let me show you one more of these skins. Another one that looks really cool, in my opinion, is the Quartz one. So let's download this guy. This is a new bootstrap.min.css. So let's get rid of this guy. Let's call this Bootstrap min. And then we're going to overwrite the old one with the new one. Okay, so let's replace. Take a look what this one looks like. And here's our glass version, which again is pretty dope. Okay, so if you are, oh, it looks like we need to fine tune this a little bit. But if you are in a rush, right, and you want your stuff to look halfway decent, as we can see, we need to tweak this a little bit, and that's fine. But not a whole lot, right? We got to get rid of some padding here and there. We got to fix our text here, but it looks pretty dope with barely any effort at all. Okay, great. So of course I will push this stuff up to GitHub. I'll give Josh and John these links. And yes, now there's no excuse. So go ahead and take it away, John and Josh. I appreciate your time. I love showing this to everybody, and I hope you guys learned a lot.
Awesome. Thank you, Narciso. Okay,
Thank
I'll
you.
just close this out by showing the schedule, and then we'll go ahead and end this recording. So give me a quick moment to do that. Okay, here we are. We have just finished the Bootstrap demo. Okay, at 2, let's check in back at this room, and we'll do another session on media queries. Okay, so we'll do media queries this afternoon. Thank you again to Narciso for that awesome Bootstrap lecture, most in-depth Bootstrap lecture I've yet to see. So
Thank you, sir.
awesome. Thank you, guys. I'll have this recording up for everyone in just a moment. Okay, so thank you, everyone, and I'll stop the recording.